I think the biggest weakness in opposition's case is how unresilient it is to the vast amount of particular scenarios that exist if you are to be put in the position of a young child. Because insofar as this round is concerned, the only time in which you unlock a lot of their case is when you have favorable circumstances. When you have a family at the very least capable enough to support all of the siblings so they have the capability to have a bias and to be able to be better once the future children rolls along. You have a family that is relatively healthy, that is on mean, not abusive, that is on mean, just a lot more resilient. The TLDR of it is, on opposition, you have to suspend your reality to the minute and small cases wherein it is favorable to be born young. What we say on government is that the unfortunate reality is being middle class and being an average person in this world is just a lot less favorable than theirs. There's so many variables to consider, and all things considered, we'd rather be a warrior in a garden rather than a gardener in a war. There are two main questions in this debate. One, where does this debate take place and under what circumstances is it favorable for the person? Two, what is a better outcome for both of the oldest and the youngest in how society structures itself, which operates on opposition's best frame? First clash. What is the clash? Joseph's frame is quite important because of the variability that exists in the world when you're born a woman, whether or not you're born poor. What if insert some random variable change exists in your birth lottery? The thing is, it is a common factor across all societies and all cultures that the eldest gets the most priority, and I understand that opposition is correct in pointing out the bad stuff that can happen. But as to what Joseph explains in his speech, you as the eldest sibling have the most capacity to be able to change the things that happen to you because of the expectation to be responsible, to have the first mover's advantage. So I just want to be clear that how having a bad life is not something that's comparative and it's not the tipping point in this debate, is how you're able to move past that and be able to have or react in a more appropriate way. I'll take the POI now, sure.
You talk about resilience. Why would the life that you've mentioned can be hard for literally everyone not teach you how to be resilient, even if you didn't have all of these really soul crunching responsibilities at home when you were a young child? Why would life not teach you that?
Because as a young person, you're literally being coddled by your parents. That is the supposed benefit that you guys have on your side of the house. We think if you want to coddle your children, that's not likely to make them a more resilient person. LO explains two crucial points. LO says that the youngest gets better treatment because of the experience they get from the parents that raise other children, right? There's a couple of responses to take out this idea. One, I think LO weakens her own argument by explaining how parents are likely to want to try their best, at least in regards to incentive and how they want to treat their child, right? As to what she says, no parent wants to be a dick. They don't want to traumatize their child on average. So that goes against her own point in explaining how older children are at very least likely to have much more of a bad experience. If you don't believe that, Matthew, the DPM own analysis is able to question this particular idea because they say a marginal change affects how they treat their second child, but that marginal change is never really explained. Two, I think their point on inherently is also something that's not really important, or it's not debate winning. Let's be charitable here. What change do they actually want on opposition? They want an easier life. They want a more comfortable life. Look, man, the same way they say having a bad life exists on a spectrum, having the life of comfort also exists on a spectrum. Maybe if you're rich, being well-favored and being coddled is all well and good, and you're likely to live a happier life, and yeah, on that case, sure, we'll lose a debate on that point. But in any other instance where you get the benefit, or when you get that particular frame of coddling, when you're poor in some random third world country like the one I live in, that's quite possibly the worst choice for us because they are not able to acclimate to the harsh realities of our world because of how they were brought up. The second point that LO has is that you have a mentor and that's good because you get better figures. First, this was really a one-liner argument. It doesn't really get built at any point of LO. But assuming they do build this, right? This is where Matthew comes in and directly responds in establishing and explaining how it's better to be seen as a more mature individual because that is how you unlock the agency to be able to change things on a better capacity. But even if you don't believe this, they have never proved the process by which these parents become better. They assume it just happens because you have a benchmark, but even if you have a benchmark, you don't have the capacity to act it out given your position in the familiar hierarchy. So maybe you have the incentive, like maybe you can look at your older sibling and be like, this is what I want, or maybe this is not what I want, but they never get the capacity to be able to actually act it out. How do we weigh this particular clash? First, on our side of the house, like on certainty, you would just guaranteed at least some form of pragmatic ability. Note that Op seems to not respond to this idea, so I'm assuming it's favored, like it's a point that favors our side. The second is just on capacity and first mover's advantage. Again, I want to point out where our case particularly stands. Sure, all of the bad things happen in life, but as an older sibling, you are just far more likely to be able to actually have the capacity to be able to take that in your own and be able to improve as a better person, because inherently, the older child has a lot more responsibility. The second clash is just on deputy extension. Matthew runs a lot of situational analysis that is able to deal with our worst case. Assuming LO is correct in that it is a hard life, the debate doesn't get decided on what situation is particularly better. We don't have the power to influence that particular matter. So the tipping point in this debate is on the ability for the sibling to be able to change the situation. What did DLO say in response to this, right? Contrast this to Ops extension case because they stop at the point in which the bad stuff happens. And yeah, it sucks that children do have a burden, or like a lot of children do have the particular responsibility to grow up a lot like faster than like the childhood that they deserve, right? And that's a really bad thing. But obviously it's not where this debate like stands on. It's not the tipping point in this debate. What we say on side government is that in those worst of moments, as the older sibling, you just have more of a capacity and more of an ability to be able to take that particular experience and actually do something about it. E.g., all of the agency analysis and all of the mechanisms that Matthew gave, at least in response to being able to incentivize and to actually act on that incentive. So, on our side of the house, yes, we acknowledge the fact that this is an imperfect world. But that imperfection, at the very least, leads us to be able to put ourselves in the best possible position. On side opposition, you never have that choice. For all of those reasons, very, very proud to propose.